Hey everyone, welcome back to the Jays Put Down Football Podcast. I'm your host Jay, and as always, I'm here with Shehan Jeyarajah here, and he is a football analyst with CBS Sports. Glad to have him back on the podcast. We had him on before a few episodes ago, and I just wanted to talk with him about the top prospects in the NFL draft and a few more things here. So thank you for coming on today, Sean.
Yeah, thanks as always for having me.
Yeah, man. Yeah. So again, we're in the off season of the NFL right now. We're moving through this free agency, of course, and we're getting closer to the draft. And this is a very deep draft at a lot of different positions. So I would just like to know who are your top draft prospects this year. Your guys that you think are going to make significant impacts in the league when they are drafted.
Yeah, well, I think you have to look first at the quarterbacks. I think this is a pretty interesting quarterback draft. Obviously, Bryce Young and CJ Stroud have to be 1 and 2 on my board. I think that when you look at the Panthers trading up, a big part of that is getting in the range to draft one of those two players. And then you do start to see maybe an Anthony Richardson moving up. I would have him sort of a tier below. But, certainly those three players look like ones who have a chance to come out and be top 10 NFL draft picks. And then once you get past the quarterbacks, I think there are two defensive players who really stand apart. Will Anderson, as an edge rushing linebacker, was an incredible player for 2 years at Alabama. Leaves as one of the highest rated defensive players ever at Alabama, all-time sack leader for a single season. And then you look at Jalen Carter. Obviously, Jalen Carter is dealing with some off-field stuff right now that could potentially affect his draft stock. But if you look at them as pure prospects, I think that, in some order, I think that Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, and then Will Anderson and Jalen Carter probably have to be the top 4 on anybody's board.
Yeah, I agree. You mentioned the quarterbacks. This is a very quarterback-heavy draft class. Obviously, headline with C.J. Stroud, Bryce Young, Anthony Richardson, include Will Levis, among other guys. So it's you mentioned the Panthers trading up to get that first overall pick. And everybody's pretty much going with the notion that they're going to most likely take C.J. Stroud. And could you expand possibly why you think that is, and why they might not go with Bryce Young here, and why everybody's tending to think they're trending more towards Stroud?
Well, when you look at CJ Stroud, he is a perfect NFL draft prospect. He has the big arm. He has the pocket presence. He looks like how quarterbacks are supposed to look in every single way. His film is fantastic, absolutely. And I think that you look at his production over the last 2 years from a consistency perspective, from an accuracy perspective. It checks all the boxes. I really do understand why he's considered potentially, the number 1 pick in the draft. I think that if you were to go 10 years back, 15 years back, this wouldn't even be a conversation. CJ Stroud is the prototypical quarterback based on what we've thought about it in the past. Now, I think he's still a very, very, very good prospect. Certainly you make the comparison with a Bryce Young, right? Bryce Young, the big knock against him is that he's undersized. He's just over 5'10". But he says it a lot. He's been 5'10" his whole life. Obviously, he was during his time at Alabama when he put together one of the best 2-year runs in the history of college football. And the thing that Bryce Young gives you is he just gives you a level of dynamic playmaking that we've never seen from CJ Stroud. Not that he's not capable of it, but just we never saw it during his time at Ohio State. We saw one game against Georgia in the college football playoff where we started to see CJ Stroud get a little bit more off schedule and create some opportunities with his legs. But prior to that, we had never really seen it. And with Bryce Young, this is something that that you're getting. It's that he can create outside of the pocket. He can do all the different arm angles. That he can launch beautiful deep shots. So, I think that CJ Stroud is the safer pick. I think that Bryce Young is probably the more high upside pick. And so for a team like the Panthers, who obviously has been in quarterback purgatory in a lot of ways since Cam Newton left that franchise, I think it makes sense why they are looking potentially at a safer option, somebody who you can be pretty confident is going to be an above-average NFL quarterback.
Yeah, I agree. And they obviously wouldn't have made that move if they didn't believe in, hey, we're going to go get one of those top guys. And of course, they traded DJ Moore and some draft capital to get the Bears' number 1 overall pick. And that has me thinking they're definitely going to go quarterback, and it's most likely going to be C.J. Stroud. And qualities, like you said, the arm, the pocket presence, the awareness of, he's got those NFL quarterback qualities, and I would think they're going to throw him into the water right away when he does arrive in the NFL. So, and defensively, your top defensive guys, Will Anderson, Jalen Carter, where do you see the best fits for these guys falling here in the draft?
Well, I think the great thing about both of them is that they are players who I think could fit in any system, in any scheme. Certainly when you're looking at Will Anderson, I think that he most naturally fits maybe within a 3-4 type system where you're playing him on the edge. I do think that he has some versatility to also play also a sort of true linebacker role as well, and have the opportunity to maybe shift out into coverage. So, I think that you'd be looking for a defensive coordinator who really likes to be creative with his linebackers, be creative with his edge rushers. I don't think that he's a one-trick pony who you're just going to rush off the edge. I think that he has more versatility than that. During his time at Alabama, you saw him at times even line up closer to the middle of the line, not necessarily as a defensive tackle, but just he'd attack through the middle of the line as well, not just come off the edge. So I think that a really creative defensive coordinator would probably be a good fit for him. Certainly there's a couple that you look at in that top 5 to 10 range, but really I think that's when you look at the board, there's going to be a lot of options for him. Jalen Carter, similar sort of deal. I mean, he is more of a prototypical position player. You look at him as a defensive tackle. I think that he's somebody who's going to come in and be a run stuffer right away. You can play him, I think, in an odd or even front. I think you could even play him in some of this modern 2-4-5 stuff that we're seeing because he can play on the interior of the line. So he's somebody who I think is very easy to plug and play no matter what your defensive system is. Obviously, one thing that we're going to have to see, in addition to, like we mentioned, some of the off-field stuff that he's dealing with related to that tragic traffic accident back in January, is we're going to have to see too, does he get his body back in order? Is he able to kind of play with the level of burst that he needs to be a star at the NFL level? And we saw flashes of it at Georgia, but one of the things about playing at Georgia is that they rotate guys a lot. Jalen Carter only had to play about half of Georgia's defensive snaps this year. So it's going to be a bit of an adjustment, but we saw Jordan Davis do it last year for the Philadelphia Eagles, and he's turned into a great player. So I have every confidence that Jalen Carter is going to be able to do the same.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely agree with you there. Will Anderson, Jalen Carter, two guys that play in the SEC, that plays a big part, and they are guys you can really stick, like I said, any defense, really, and just the creative defensive mind, controlling those things and see where they can fit, in their scheme. So I'm interested to see how that happens, in the draft and see where they fall. What are you think are coaches and scouts and GMs in these teams looking, as far as with Jalen Carter and the off the field issues, how much can that, hurt a draft prospect? Is that going to, you think, play a significant role in as far as where he lands or how far he goes down?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because I think that there's a pathway to where this doesn't hurt him too much at all. Obviously, look, it's a legal situation. This is one of those things that you don't want to have to talk about when you're talking about college football, right? Obviously, he's out drag racing with some friends and some staffers from the program, and it turns tragic. I think that if you are a team, you have to understand and try to figure out, is this going to be a one-time deal that he learns from? Is this going to be a situation where, you're going to have to keep an eye on this guy to keep him out of trouble for a long time? And I think that that's something where you go into the character work. And this is something that you do with every prospect, especially one that you're picking in the top 5 or 10 of the NFL draft. And so I don't think that part of things will be too much of an inhibitor. Certainly I think that it helps that Jalen Carter entered a no contest plea, resolved his legal issues. And so there isn't an impending case over his head at this point. From a legal perspective, the process is over. But certainly I think that there's a lot of questions still remaining about the way that the University of Georgia handled things, about the way that the Athens Police Department handled things. So, it's going to be something that comes up absolutely in draft rooms. And I think that as long as he's able to give satisfactory answers, I guess you'd say, during the draft process, it probably won't affect him too much, but it could. We just don't know at this point.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, yeah, I just want to get your thoughts on that. And we mentioned his name earlier, Anthony Richardson, out of Florida. You know, great prospect. You know, physical traits all there. You know, he's got a big arm. You know, and now the thing about him that's been going around a lot. You know, within NFL circles, you know, analysts is that um, he's more of a raw prospect. You know, similarly to you know, maybe Cam Newton some time ago. You know, we see the similarities there. Maybe even a little bit of you know, Josh Allen. You know, so what's your opinion on Anthony Richardson? You know, and is he a guy that you think a team should, if he's there early, take that flyer on, or maybe not?
Well, for me, I think that when I look at Anthony Richardson, there's a lot of red flags for me because I think that you make the comparison to a Josh Allen, you know, even if in a different way, you make the comparison to a Patrick Mahomes, players who are pretty raw coming out of school. I just see different issues facing Anthony Richardson because, you know, for Josh Allen, right, he played 2 years at a junior college and then 2 years in a very run-based offense at Wyoming. So he was not developed as a quarterback, but he was never really attempted to be developed as a quarterback in some ways too. With Patrick Mahomes, you know, they leaned on what he did well and didn't do much to improve what he didn't do well during his time at Texas Tech. And so I think that told me, you know, they were trying to do things that maybe fit his skill set best to make the game easy for him. Well, with Anthony Richardson, he didn't really do anything especially well at the college level, right? And he was playing at Florida in a really talented offense, first for Dan Mullen, who obviously has a good history with quarterbacks, helped develop Dak Prescott during his time at Mississippi State. Kyle Trask is now a backup for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So like somebody who's done well with quarterbacks before. And then the other part of it is that then Billy Napier comes in, you know, and I think that Billy Napier's first season was a little bit of a mixed bag, but you know, every time that we've seen Anthony Richardson, we have seen a raw player. We haven't seen much improvement over the course of his career. Now, he's had moments, he's had plays, he's had games where you look up and you say, man, if this ever comes together, this could be incredible. But I don't think we've seen it consistently. And for me, the biggest red flag for a quarterback is accuracy. The reality is, by the time that a quarterback gets to the college level, and especially when they're heading to the pro level, most of the time they have thrown so much that their accuracy is what it is. Now, there are things that can be improved. Certainly one thing we see with Anthony Richardson is that, you know, some of it is technical, some of it is footwork, some of it is planting in the pocket. You know, he tends to be a little trigger happy, you know, when he's on the run. But I think that something that you have to ask yourself if you are an NFL team is how much of that can be coached out of him. Because, you know, for example, you know, I got to cover Jalen Hurts a little bit during his year at Oklahoma. And one thing that we saw was that Lincoln Riley limited the offense for him to compensate for his skill sets. But once they did, he was able to execute at an extremely high level and certainly has grown a lot as a passer at the NFL level. My question for Anthony Richardson is, you know, what is the thing that you can hang your hat on at the next level? You know, you see all these great athletic testing numbers, you see the big arm, but you know, it's one thing to have a low completion percentage because you were throwing difficult passes, and it's another thing because your timing and accuracy was off. And so I have a lot of questions about him at the next level. I think that I would not consider picking him unless I was in a situation like, say, the Vikings, for example, where you have a Kirk Cousins who you know is going to be the quarterback for maybe 2 more years at least. And then you can kind of move on from him there. I would not consider playing him early. If I was a quarterback needy team right now, I would be very afraid to take a chance on him too early.
Yeah, and I like that. You know, Anthony Richardson, yeah, he's the athletic ability and, you know, just the physical traits we saw there. We saw that at the combine, right? You know, he's got this great vertical jump and, you know, his 40, you know, his cone drill, all those things were good. You know, he's just a freak. He's an athletic freak, right? But you need more than that to succeed at the NFL level. We saw that with, you know, Cam Newton. You know, so perfect example. And I just, you know, Anthony, he's a guy, yeah, just a lot of technical things, you know, footwork, you know, just that that pocket awareness, things that, C.J. Stroud, Bryce Young are pretty good at, but I don't see so much of that in Anthony Richardson. That's why if I'm an NFL team, I'm afraid to, take him there really early or just throw him out there in the fire. I wouldn't do so with him particularly. So, it's definitely going to be interesting. So, moving on to our next segment here, back to the college game. Who would you say, man, who is your college football surprise team for the next season? Who you think is going to come out of the woods and just shock a lot of people, if not everybody, or maybe just have a better season than they did last year?
Sure. I think there are a couple of teams. So two teams that got really close last year who I think could make that final jump potentially into playoff contenders. I kind of view them, they're two opposite sides of the country, but I think that they have some comparisons. I've got Florida State down in the ACC, and I've got Washington over in the Pac-12. I'm going to start with Washington because I don't think people really understand how good of a year they had last year. They had a bad loss to Arizona State, a 7-point loss, kind of just an emotional letdown sort of game. If they don't lose that game, they're playing for the Pac-12 instead of Utah against USC. That's how good they were last year. They finished 11-2, the best record that they've had since they were a playoff team back in 2016. And they bring back a whole lot of pieces. Their entire receiver room is back. Their quarterback, Michael Penix Jr., is back. They have a chance to be really special. I think they're only going to get better on the defensive side of the ball. Something that people might not realize is that Ryan Grubb, their offensive coordinator, was courted for multiple jobs, including the Alabama offensive coordinator job and the Texas A&M offensive coordinator job. And Washington paid out to keep him. They pay him now over $2 million per year. So they, I think, have something really special going on in Seattle. And I think that they could be a team, when you look at the Pac-12 next year, it's going to be a really, really good competitive Pac-12, but they could be a team who has a chance to maybe pop out and surprise some people. And on the Florida State side, we saw some of these moments, right? We saw them play against LSU in week 1. We saw how they kind of finished the season, obviously beating Oklahoma in their bowl game. And they also bring everybody back. They have a chance to, I think, really be that team that competes with Clemson from the ACC. There's really no reason that anybody expected quarterback James Blackman to be back. I think that he's somebody who could push his way into the Heisman conversation if a couple things break right for him. And Jared Verse at defensive end is not somebody who was expected to be back. He was somebody who could have been potentially a first-round NFL draft pick, but instead opted to come back for another year of eligibility because he believes in what Florida State is doing. And by the way, they add one of the top 3 transfer classes in the country as well. So I think that those two programs are two who could crash the periphery of this playoff case. Remember, this is the last year of the purely 4-team playoff. And so if one of those teams is able to break their way in, I think that absolutely changes things.
Yeah, definitely. You mentioned Washington and Florida State, 2 teams, that just, they tremendous improvements within their team in that those buildings there. And Florida State definitely with Jordan Travis at quarterback. Great player he is. I like his game, and I think they're going to continue to improve under get the coach's name, man, for Florida State.
Mike Norvell,
Yeah, Mike Norvell, yes. Mike Norvell, great coach. I like what he's doing down there at Florida State, and I definitely think they can continue to improve and make a run, possibly. So, and for my teams, I have Colorado and Texas. I think Texas is, you bring Quinn Ewers back at quarterback. And also Arch Manning is going to be there as well. But I think that's Ewers' job right there. But I think Texas is going to be, you lose Bina Robinson to the draft, which it hurts. But they're returning a lot of good players, and I think they can maybe surprise a few people as well. My other team, like I said, Colorado. Deion Sanders coming over, and with Prime, you're going to get a lot of transfers, which he has done. And I just like the culture he's trying to establish there. Real quick, what are your thoughts on Colorado, man? I mean, do you like what Deion Sanders is doing at Colorado?
Well, I'll tell you one thing first. So a few months ago, back after Coach Prime was tired, I live in the Dallas area, and I went and stood in line to go get some barbecue at a place down here. And I had somebody, I mentioned I was a college football writer, and I had people ask me about Deion. And, the last time that I had people ask me about Colorado football was never. right? So, I mean, to say that he has changed things at Colorado is an understatement. I mean, they're on the front page of CBSSports.com all the time. They're on ESPN, all this sort of stuff, right? So much more attention brought to this program. And I think that was a key for them. They knew that they were falling into football irrelevance. And you know, for people who are, you know, younger than even me, and I wasn't around for it. I mean, Colorado was a program that won a national championship back in 1990 and had a Heisman winner in 1994. So this has been a program that has been competitive in the past. Things have gone downhill since they joined the Big 12 and obviously moved over to the Pac-12. Only 2 bowl games, I believe, since 2008, and one of them was during the COVID year. So, I mean, this is a program that needs a shot in the arm in the biggest way possible, and Deion Sanders is going to be that. I think my concern with them in 2023 specifically is that they are in such a deep hole from a roster perspective. They're bringing in, you know, they're going to replace more than half the roster this upcoming year between high school recruits and transfers. But it's going to be a lot of guys who have never played football together. I think that for them, they have some fun opportunities where I think that they're going to, you know, be able to show out. In their first game under Deion Sanders, they played TCU, the team that just played the national championship game. And this is not the same TCU from 2022. They lost a lot of production. If they're able to give TCU a scare, I think they'll get some people's attention. Week 2, they play Nebraska, or it might be week 3. And so, you know, that's going to be another high profile game where they'll be able to potentially scare a first year head coach in Matt Rule. And so I think that there's going to be a lot of highs. I think there'll be some real bad lows as well. And ultimately, you know, I think that if they're fighting for bowl eligibility heading into November, you have to feel really good about what they're building over there. Because then I think that when you head into 2024 and have a slightly more mature roster that's competed at this level, I'm very optimistic that Colorado is going to be able to go out and win some games. I don't know if it's going to be in year 1, but it's going to happen.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's just going to take time for those guys to gel and form that chemistry, of course. But it will be fun to watch as they continue to go throughout the season there. So, yeah, I mean, yeah, it's going to be something to really watch for. You know, and again, also the draft coming up in April on the NFL side of things. So definitely going to be, you know, keeping an eye on that. But tell us where we can find your work, Shehan, and where we can just see where, you know, where we can find your writings.
Yeah, well, you can follow me on Twitter at Shehan Jeyarajah. I post everything over there. And you can also check out all of my work at CBSSports.com as well.
Okay, yes, sir. You guys make sure you check that out there for Shehan. And we will, of course, be talking to you again later as we get closer to the draft. Shehan, thank you for coming on the podcast today. We appreciate your insight, man. Yeah, really, thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, man. Well, you have a great rest of your day, okay?
All right, you too, man. See ya.